Hola, welcome to episode 8 of the Chicana Therapist Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Xochilt Alamillo, and today we're going to be talking about mental health practices that we already do as a community because mental health is not just therapy. So as we know, mental health care in the United States is based on a very Western individualistic model, which involves therapy, maybe medication, maybe self-help books, things like that. And those things have value. Of course, I'm a therapist. I would never say that there's no value in therapy, but we have to be realistic about the access that people have to these resources. And speaking about the Latinx community, there's a huge stigma around therapy. And I would even argue to say that there's an even bigger stigma around medication, like antidepressants, anti-anxiety, that type of thing. And self-help books aren't always for a Latinx audience. So I wanted to come on and talk about things that our ancestors did, things that we still do that are very good for our mental health. And they are things that I, as the therapist, would recommend that people do anyway, even if they do come to therapy, because they can be just as helpful and much more accessible. So this is for the people out there who want to add to therapy or want to talk to their loved ones about ways to keep yourself in good mental health. So our communities have always had the tools. Our ancestors had the tools. We just didn't call them mental health practices, right? And today we're going to honor them. We're going to go over some of them. And I would love to hear from you all about anything that helps your mental health and that you would like me to talk about in the future. Personally, I can say that therapy did a lot for my mental health. There was a lot that I learned in therapy. There was a lot that I didn't realize were things that were either harming or helping my mental health. But I have to be honest and say that probably the biggest help to my personal mental health was not therapy. It was very helpful and I would do it again and I continue to do it. But it's the other things that I already had access to that I would say made a bigger impact. So let's start with what being mentally healthy actually means. What does it mean to take care of your mental health? Because I feel like we throw it around a lot and we don't always really know what it means, except for maybe we think that it means being happy all the time or never being sad. And that is not actually what being in good mental health means. Being in good mental health means that you're connecting with others in a meaningful way. It means that you know how to regulate. So when things do happen, because it's life and inevitably things will happen, you know how to regulate your emotions. You know how to cope with things that happen to you. You know that rest is important for your mental health, not working all the time, but also resting, participating in joy, community. Those are all things that our culture already values and addresses. But they also happen to be things that really matter in order for us to be mentally well. Now, I want to be clear, especially because I know that a lot of fellow therapists listen to my podcast. I say a lot, but a few therapists listen to my podcast. And I want to make sure to validate that our cultural wisdom and our indigenous wisdom is evidence-based practice. I'm not saying that it isn't. And also, it doesn't need that Western validation, right? It's not something that we need to have in the literature in order for it to be valid. But I do want to push back against the idea that this is just like folklore, right? This is just lo que dice la gente. I want to be clear and say that this is evidence-based. A lot of these things are evidence-based. And so I wanted to throw that out there for my fellow therapists who maybe hadn't thought about incorporating some of the things that we're going to talk about today or encourage the incorporation of them, because I think it really does a lot for the person that we are working with, our clients, to let them know that they really are the expert and they really do have the answers within themselves. Because let's be honest, not everybody has access to therapy. First of all, Latinx people are the most underinsured group in this country. So that's a reality. And with or without health insurance, mental health therapy can get expensive. It has a high cost and that's a whole other conversation, because I think that a lot of people get angry at us as therapists for charging what we're worth and charging what we need to charge in order to make a living. But again, that's a whole other conversation. But it does cost money. And even in the pro bono world or the sliding scale, it can be difficult. There can be waiting lists, etc. Cost is definitely an issue. Language barriers are an issue. Our monolingual Spanish speakers, our monolingual indigenous language speakers don't always have a lot of choices when it comes to going to therapy and speaking their heart language. There's availability. I can tell you where I'm from in Colorado. If you are bilingual and bicultural, you're pretty busy. I know a lot of fellow Latina therapists are not taking new clients, or they have waiting lists or some other issue. And then even within that, there's a need for cultural fit. I know that we're often lumped into this monolith, but there's those of us that are Chicanas, those of us that are Puerto Rican, Dominican, etc. And while we do pretty well at understanding each other, it still can be a barrier for some people. So yes, cost is an issue, but it's not always about cost. I also want to name that in many of our Latinx cultures, curanderismo is a formal tradition that is often turned to for healing. And I want to make sure and name that as its own healing system with its own knowledge. It isn't just a superstition. I know that depending on religion, you can get into people who don't believe in that, but curanderas have been around longer than religion. And so it's important that we acknowledge that this is a valid way of healing that many people choose. But again, it can be cost restrictive, or you maybe can't find a curandera in the middle of, I don't know, Oklahoma in the United States. So we run into similar issues. So like I said, we have our own things that we can do on our own that we already kind of do as a community. The difference is that we can be more intentional about the way we incorporate these practices that I'm going to talk about, and not incorporating them just as things we do out of habit, but being intentional and seeing it as a part of our healing as well. All right, so let's get started with my very favorite, and that is plantitas and nature, gardening and nature. So there's a lot of science behind like garden therapy, or just being out in nature and being able to feel more grounded, being able to regulate your nervous system. It's been shown to lower our cortisol, our stress hormone. It helps restore our focus and our attention. Many people say that being in nature helps them be at peace or feel like they're connected to something bigger than them. Some others say that tending to a living thing is like a form of purpose and meaning making. We hear this about our pets. In therapy world, we hear a lot of people finding meaning in having a pet, but this can also happen tending to plants. So it can really help someone to feel purposeful, and not to mention that, our ancestors did this for food. But sometimes if you're like me and you're in your señora era, I don't care if you're 20 or 60, tending to our gardens or our plants on the daily is something that helps me keep a routine. It helps me stay consistent. It helps me interact with nature, because your girl is not a nature person. I am not one to hike or do anything around like bugs and animals. That's just not me, but I love gardening and I love plants. And so for me, it's something that brings me a lot of peace and comfort and ritual. So I bet a lot of us knew abuelas or tias or your own mom or even yourself who love plants, love gardening. I see you out there taking a codito from somebody's planta in public. I've seen videos about that. I think it's so funny, because my grandma used to do that. She used to obviously ask when she knew the person if she could have a codito. She called it a codito, so like a cutting. But if it was out in public, it was fair game. And so all of this is something healing. And that's not even to speak of the data that there are behind having your hands in soil, or just breathing the fresh air, or getting that sun on your face. that's not even to speak of that. So if you've ever wondered, like, why is this woman, me, so into gardening and plants? I would say that it has a lot to do with regulating my nervous system and encourages good mental health for me. So if you're not into plants yet, maybe you can start getting curious about it. I love all kinds. My first addiction was houseplants, and then from that it went to vegetable gardening, and then it went to flower outside gardening. So check it out. The next thing that our community already does, and that is good for our mental health or our health in general, are the herbal remedies or the tecitos that somebody introduced us to, whether that's your grandma or your mom or some other tia or some vecina, it doesn't matter. There's always someone telling you to drink this or drink that. Popular ones might be manzanilla, chamomile, hierbabuena, spearmint or peppermint, ruda, rue. So lots of different types of herbs. I know this is connected to the gardening and the plants, but there's lots of data out there that tells you that herbal remedies are legit. You might read that manzanilla or chamomile is helpful for anxiety or for a sense of calm. Hierbabuena or spearmint is for digestion or for stress. Your té de tila is another one that might help you with sleep. All of these things that our grandmothers might have encouraged us to drink in a tea, they aren't placebos. They actually have data behind them. There isn't a huge body of research behind things like that because if you think about it, somebody has to pay for those research studies to be done. And who wants to pay to prove that hierbabuena is good for your stomach when they will rather pay for research studies on medication that they can sell for a lot more money and that you can't grow in your backyard? So many of the herbs that you might have grown up with or heard about have documented pharmacological properties. So they're legit good for you, good for different purposes. Not to mention that this ritual of preparing and receiving a teacup or a tecito is also relational. You're having a tacita de té, or in my case, my grandma used to go outside and pluck the hierbabuena or whatever it was, boil it in water, and then bring me my tea when I wasn't feeling well. And something about that whole ritual of her doing that for me, and sometimes she sat with me while I drank it, but even if she didn't, it felt really special. When I was younger, I used to just kind of roll my eyes because I thought that it was just bullshit. But as I'm older now, I know that no, it actually, our ancestors knew what was up. They knew how to cure us. I'll bring in curanderismo again because curanderismo can also use a lot of herbs, not just for ingesting, but also for limpias. They might use eggs for limpias. They might do lots of different things that represent cleansing your energy or healing you spiritually or physically or emotionally. And that has been sustained for generations. So don't scoff at that. Not that you do, but I think it's easy to think that if you're not wearing a white lab coat, then you're not really a healer, and that's so untrue. And so a well-trained curandera is gold. One thing I encourage you to do is to learn what your family used or what they use now and why, because I tell you the knowledge is worth preserving. I wish I had asked my grandma more about what she knew. There were certain things that I did capture, like I remember what they were for, and also my mom remembers what they're for. But I just feel like there's so much knowledge lost, especially when we're immigrants or children of immigrants and we get busy and we don't have access maybe to the plantas, and we kind of lose that knowledge. So I encourage you to ask your family, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, what kind of herbal remedies they know about, and maybe document that. Okay, a third thing that our community is really, really good at, and maybe we don't do it as intentionally. I know a lot of you do, but let me go ahead and tell you, it's music and dancing. Baile, música, we're very music-oriented people. Music in the car, music while we're cooking, music while we're cleaning. It is very, very heavy into our culture, and I love that for us. But music is also very, very heavily backed by research when it comes to improving your mood, activating your limbic system. If you think about it, your entire nervous system is reset, right? Who can be grumpy and dancing? I mean, I know some of us have RBF while we're dancing, but that doesn't mean that we're grumpy. So, doing movement, rhythm, being in community and dancing, that can do amazing things for our mental health. And it makes sense because what do we do when we're sad? Music, right? Bust out the chente or something like that when you're sad. When you're celebrating, bust out the banda, the tamborazo, the cumbia, the Bad Bunny. It doesn't matter. We do it when we're celebrating, when we're sad, when we need to get through something. I can tell you, Snow the product got me through my dissertation. Come to my show, Snow. And so that makes sense that you can use dance and music intentionally to have good mental health. As a therapist, I talk a lot about this idea of closing the stress cycle. Basically, what that means is when we're going constantly running on stress, it could be a day at work, like you're just have a really stressful day. We talk about closing the stress cycle, which means like you have to find a way to release that stress, release trauma if that's what it was too. And so dance is one of those things that you can do to close the stress cycle, to release some of that stress that you're carrying, whether that's daily, whether that's a moment or weekly, it doesn't matter. I know that the older you get, sometimes the harder it gets to go out to dance, whether that's at a party or a club or whatever it is, but it doesn't have to be that. You can dance at home by yourself in your room. As long as you are moving your body, it is definitely a way to close that stress cycle. I didn't grow up with like playlists. I grew up with CDs and maybe you had a mixtape, which is the closest to a playlist I can think of. But when I work with young people, they often have playlists for their different moods. And they are so much farther than me because I encourage my adult clients to have playlists for that same thing. You want to have a playlist ready when you're sad, a playlist ready when you're happy, when you're trying to get motivated. And it's up to you to decide what kind of music you want to listen to in those instances. But doing that and being intentional about it, putting on a song that moves you, especially when you're dysregulated and you just need to get back into your body, can be really powerful. All right, next is family time and co-regulation. So co-regulation is a term that we use in the therapy world for what happens when a regulated nervous system helps calm a dysregulated one. So for example, if you're a mom and you're soothing your toddler because they're crying, they're dysregulated, you soothe them, you are co-regulating with them. And we do this as bigger families too. And as Latinx folks, we get together with our family a lot, or it's very likely that we do when we can. And so gathering, sharing meals, just being in the same space with each other can be really healing to our nervous system. Ojo, this is only if you feel safe around your family. I'm not talking to those of you who maybe don't get along with their family as well, or are triggered or activated by their family. I'm talking about family that makes you feel safe, loved ones that make you feel safe. This can be chosen family too. I don't know about you all, but when we get together, we do a lot of storytelling. I think that at least me, when I used to think of storytelling, I used to think like gather around children and like the elder is telling us all a story. And that may be true, but that's not usually what it looks like for me. For me, it's just like, hey, remember when? And then we laugh or we think about that time or that memory. I have those seen elders in my husband's family when, they gather. He has a much bigger family, so they'll gather and they'll tell stories about when they were young and the rancho and what they used to do and how they used to write love notes to the other people they liked and, things like that. It can also look like that. So intergenerational narrative can really do something for our nervous system. We make meaning. We feel like we know where we come from. We understand who we are, who our ancestors were. And so that can be really powerful as well. And then I put this in here too, but sobadas. Our community, yes, we see curanderas, but we often see sobadoras or sobadores, people who use touch to practice somatic healing, to either work your muscles or bones. There's hueseros. So there's lots of people in our community who offer touch as one of those ways to regulate your nervous system. It's something that, like, if you have empacho or if you have digestive issues or if you have back problems, I knew people who were having fertility issues and they would go see a sobadora. So that is also something that has been in our culture for generations and that has value in it. I'm not saying that you have fertility issues, go see a sobadora, but I do know of a lot of people who feel like that was what helped them, or that it was helpful, or that they felt like they were doing something and they just felt connected to something. Or at the very least, they didn't feel alone because the sobadores would have people to come see them for the same issue that they have. All right, next is another one of my favorites, food. So our culture is big on food, and let's be real, it's because we have the best one. We have the best food. And so using food as a way of coming together or even cooking together as a ritual is relational, it's sensory, especially if you're sitting there with masa. It can be grounding. It can be just really touching to see recipes passed down as a form of a cultural memory, maybe, or as a connection to ancestors where we get our recipes from. And when someone is teaching you how to cook in a way that her ancestors taught her how to cook, or his ancestors taught him how to cook. Not to mention sharing the meals that we prepare or that we buy. That's fine. Sharing any meal is one of the oldest forms of community care. And so I encourage all of you to notice how you feel when you cook a recipe from your family, or notice how it feels to eat with your family versus eating alone. Just notice the difference in connection and ritual. There's a place for both of them, but again, we're trying to bring in more intentionality. So just pay more attention and see what comes up. All right, next is altares or altars. So altares can be used as a grief ritual, right? As connection to ancestors. So it's this space that holds what matters to you. It might be photos of people who have passed. It might be objects or candles or flowers, any external reminder of who you are and who loves you. And again, it can be used for grief, but some people have them all the time and it's not considered a grief ritual, but just a part of who they are and a daily grounding practice. You've probably seen a lot around Day of the Dead, Dia de Muertos. And yes, that obviously is one of the biggest examples of something like this, but it can be, like I said, year round. And it doesn't have to be tied to religion. You can have an altar and make it a practice of intention or remembrance. It doesn't have to be tied to religion. So I know a few people who do this and feel like it's grounding to them, and they feel like their ancestors have their back or their loved ones have their back, and they live that way day to day, and that really helps their mental health. Next, we have prayer and spirituality. For many in our community, spirituality is not separate from their mental health. It's central to it. A lot of people are religious, or they can be religious, but not always. I have seen that being spiritual is not and does not have to be the same as religion. Your spirituality can be tied to one, but it doesn't have to be. Spiritual is what fills your spirit. So what fills your spirit? Is it connection to other humans? Is it your faith? Is it nature? What is it? That's what you have to think about. When I talk about spirituality, I am not necessarily talking about religion. Same thing for prayer. Some people use prayer as a form of like structured reflection or as a release or a connection to something larger than themselves, whether that's God or the universe or the ancestors, whatever it may be. It serves as like this reflection and this way of grounding. And there is research around spirituality and mental health outcomes. Actually, it is shown that people who tend to have a spiritual practice tend to have greater resilience and lower rates of like depression and anxiety. And again, that doesn't have to mean religion. You can be an atheist and still be spiritual because you feel connected to nature, whether that's plants, animals, the sun, the planet, other humans. It doesn't matter. So it can look different for everyone. Yes, it can look like prayer, like your traditional Catholic prayer, for example. It can look like curanderismo. It could look like indigenous spiritual practice. It can look like just your personal relationship with the universe. I encourage you to reconnect with whatever form of spiritual practice feels authentic to you and notice how that makes you feel, how it improves or how it impacts your mental health. And last but not least, there's laughter and celebrations. I think that as Latinx people, I love our humor. I don't know, our humor is just top notch. And laughter is physiologically regulating because it releases tension, it shifts neurochemistry, and it's almost impossible to sustain a laugh while you're still in the stress response. So talking about closing that stress cycle again, laughing can do it. And I feel like our culture, our Latinx culture, celebrates hard and laughs a lot. And I think that it's a beautiful part of our culture. We love to laugh. We love to, yes, tease each other. Ojo, I don't mean like bully each other. I mean, we can tease each other or we can laugh with each other. And celebrations, we celebrate everything. We celebrate everything, and I love that for us because celebrations mark time. They create memories. They reinforce belonging. And if you've listened to my podcast episodes in the past, you'll know that belonging and a sense of belonging is very important for our mental health. And we don't have to wait for those celebrations. We can make space for intentional joy, even if there's nothing formal to celebrate. You can find reasons to celebrate the small things, to laugh together, to be loud and just happy and joyful. Even in these times we can feel some kind of way about laughing while other people don't have the opportunity to do that. But I can tell you that if we have the opportunity, we should take it. So none of the things that I listed today are groundbreaking. I'm sure that none of you are like, wow, I've never heard that before. I know that these are things that we all do and engage in some way. The difference is that now I want you to do it with intention. Doing something out of habit while you're on autopilot is not the same as doing it as a way of healing on purpose. I'm not saying that you need to over-psychologize your plants or your gardening or anything like that, any hobby that you have. You don't have to turn your tecito into some sort of ritualistic thing. That's not what I'm saying. But you can try to show up to these moments with presence, with mindfulness, with intention, with gratitude. And so one of the things that I talk to people about when I'm talking about mindfulness, because mindfulness simply means being present and in the moment and aware. So when I'm working with people on practicing mindfulness, sometimes we have to do it a little more intentionally, and then later it might come more naturally. But when you are reaching for a practice, any of the ones we named today, I'd like for you to ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? Am I regulated? Am I feeling lonely? Am I feeling grief? Am I stressed? That is one way that you can start practicing mindfulness, because if you're notice that how you're feeling before and after you take practice, you're able to appreciate more the benefit of what you just got. And let yourself receive. Many of us are so good at caring for others through these practices, but not letting them care for us. So we'll be quick to make other people their tecito. We're quick to take other people to the curandera or the sobadora and not ourselves. And I encourage you to think about yourself too, or share the practice with someone. Community multiplies the benefits. So maybe you want to go to a curandera and you invite a friend, or you invite your mom, or you invite your sister. It doesn't matter, but maybe you can make it a group project. And then for those of you out there who are parents or who have young loved ones, please teach them why you do the things you do. Teach them why their abuelita has a garden and the tecito she offers you, what they're for, why they light a candle on the altar. Teach them why we do the things we do. So don't underestimate the practices that we already have access to, and encourage people to engage in this with you, engage in it yourself, honor these practices, but don't overpromise. These practices are powerful and wonderful, but they have their limits just like everything else. Know that some wounds need more than what I listed today, and that doesn't mean that you're a failure or that you're extra broken or anything like that. It just means that now you have information. So I want you to notice if you are reaching for these tools, you're doing the things, you're going for walks, you're doing all the things that you have access to, and still you're not finding relief, then that's when I would say look for additional support, whatever that means for you, whether that's therapy, a physician, maybe a spiritual leader, if that feels good for you. So for that, even though it's not the only resource, culturally responsive therapy exists. And you do deserve a clinician or a therapist who gets it. They are out there, and so please know that these are just various ways of getting to a similar destination. So I'm curious, what practices from this list did you grow up with that maybe you've drifted away from, or that you want to reconnect with, or anyone that I didn't mention? I would love to hear more. And those of you who have drifted away from some of these practices, what would it look like for you to return to them with intention? What would it look like for you to pass down some of these practices? And who would you pass them down to? Again, thank you so much for listening. I really do feel the love and the support. And I'm grateful that the podcast has been a resource for some of you that have reached out and let me know. I appreciate you. Remember, you can follow me on social media as the Chicana Therapist. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and you'll find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And my website is thechicanatherapist.com. Don't forget, we only have 2 spots left for our Oaxaca retreat for Latinas. Please check that out on my website. It's in September 2026. My friend, Claudia Muro, she's also a therapist, and I are hosting this retreat for 15 Latinas who are interested in reconnecting with themselves in Oaxaca, Mexico for 5 days. So please check it out. 2 more spots. Also, recently, I was a guest on Janice Torres's Yo Quiero Dinero podcast, where I talk a lot more about my personal background and I talk about my profession. And if you're interested in that, check out Yo Quiero Dinero, also on all platforms. Really, really thank you so much for being here. Cuídense muchísimo and see you next time. Thank you for listening. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing shared in this podcast constitutes therapy, clinical advice, or a therapeutic relationship. Listening to this podcast does not establish a provider-client relationship, and if you're experiencing a mental health crisis or in need of clinical support, please contact a licensed mental health professional or call or text 988 Crisis Hotline.